Would it be okay if are you able to see the screen? I think I'm still sharing my PPT.
Not yet.
Okay, just playing. Hold on. Okay. It's a little bit fidgety.
Right. Okay. I will give you a brief introduction and then we'll go ahead. It is visible. Then I will.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for the fourth lecture of the Young Folklorist lecture series. For those who are joining us for the first time, let me inform you that this lecture series brings together early career researchers who have just completed their PhDs or in the process of completing their PhDs in order to initiate conversations about their fieldwork, their understandings of folklore and performing arts, and lessons from their doctoral journeys. Tonight, we are delighted to get among us Dr. Nimeshika Venkatesan, who is an assistant professor of English at Sri Sivasubramaniya Nadar College of Engineering, Chennai. She has been exploring novel ways to promote interdisciplinary approaches to study aspects of folk cultures and South Asian storytelling genres in conjunction with religious practices, beliefs, and traditions. She is affiliated to several organizations such as the International Society for Folk Narrative Research, Society of Ethnology and Folkloristics, and Pilgrimage Studies, among others. She is the co-host of the What the Folk podcast along with Dr. Kiki Doma Bhutia, where they explore different terms in folklore in every episode as an attempt to make academia accessible. Her tonight's talk is titled as Bhaktin, Bhakti and Beyond, Folkloristic Approaches to South Asian Religion. As the name indicates, it will traverse across multiple disciplines, including folkloristics, theology, and literature. Now over to you, Dr. Venkatesan.
All right, Spandita, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. So I'm really grateful to Center for Folklore Studies and Research to have provided me this opportunity to present some of my ideas, which I've been mulling over since my doctoral. And I would love to hear some feedback from people present here to see how to develop this. So I would jump straight into my topic because I just realized while preparing my slide deck that there is quite a bit to cover, but we'll see how it goes. So my talk is titled Bhakti, Bhaktin and Beyond, right? And when I talk about these three things, I would like to allude to three of these conceits, which I have explored in my doctoral thesis and I continue to explore in different other aspects of my research. So what is very interesting about the three of these concepts here for this talk is that Bhakti is, again, a movement. It was a movement that popularized the personalized expression of religion emerging in South India and spreading to different parts of the country. And there was a certain aspect of anti-establishmentarianism to it, owing to which people were able to express themselves freely through various means that were personalized. That being the case, Bakhtin becomes very interesting to observe this, owing to the fact that it provides scope for a certain dialogism in this discussion. So what I essentially want to do with these three concepts is to discuss some of the notions of Bakhtin to understand personal expression of religion. And this I would look at in the context of just one saint, Allamma Prabhu, who is a 12th century Veerashaiva saint of Karnataka, right? And it throws light on transdisciplinary approaches, which I think is necessary to understand the social makeup of religion in itself. beyond just looking at the text, looking at other aspects of the text and other manifestations and intermediate modalities would give us more insight into the ways in which religion is organized. So when we first look at Bhakti, we would look at some of the basic introductions to it in terms of what do we understand by Bhakti. Bhakti is understood to be, by according to Radhakrishnan, a relationship of trust and love towards a personal God. Etymologically, it is derived from the word bhaj, denoting a loving attachment to God. So this aspect of complete, pure, unadulterated love is something that distinguishes Bhakti from other institutionalized forms of religion. It is also complete when this expression is shared with others and people partake in communal activities, right? For example, satsang could be one such example. So through the mediation of the Bhakti, the devotee can become a friend, it can become a child, can become, and Bhakti can become a sort of an emotion as well, right? So historically, when we look at the Bhakti movement, it is understood to be a movement. But what I propose here through a transdisciplinary approach, by bringing in another concept of the vernacular religion, which we'll see shortly, is to challenge the notion of this and to look at Bhakti as an analytical category. And for that, we will take just one example of a saint owing to the lack of time. So the second part of my talk would talk about, when I say how do we propose to do this, through what I call as the dialogic vernacular expressivity, which brings in the notion of Mikhail Bakhtin's concept of dialogism and other very prominent conceits that he explores in his compendium of research. So the unique fictionalized biography of saints written by Dr. I'm not going into what I call as the novelized saint narratives again, because that will be a whole other genre. But I would like to look at smaller aspects of this expression within the Virashaiva sect, which is the Vachana poetic composition and what is known as speech genres by Bhakti. But I relate the notion of the speech genre within this context, and I would also show you a video so you can understand this in greater detail. And finally, beyond, you're going to see that it is a question mark. It is everything that we need to explore. And that is essentially the premise for this talk and the final derivation of what we can arrive at through transdisciplinary approaches. Now, the dialogic vernacular expressivity, again, is a reading framework that I had created to study this unique genre of these novels. So according to the author, who is Dr. S. we have not mentioned that in this slide, but the fictionalized biography of saints written by him, the text that I've taken for this towards perfection, right, which is the life story of the Saint Allama Prabhu, who's one of the Virashaiva saints. And it essentially has three different categories: Desi taxonomies, Desi genres, and the hagiographical folk motif, all of which derives concepts from Bhaktin to explain its theoretical framework. But within this dialogic vernacular expressivity, I would like to focus on two aspects. One, which is utterance, as discussed by Mikhail Bakhtin, and two, which is a speech genre. And that is going to be the core focus of what we are going to discuss as dialogic vernacular expressivity within the context of Bhaktin. So moving on, I've already given a brief about Bhakti. Yes, this is right. So in congruence with this idea, let's just go over Bhakti again. In congruence with the idea of Bhakti and studying Bhakti as an analytical framework, we may perhaps consider this allied notion of what is known as vernacular religion. So a certain school of thought within religious studies, the most noted person being Leonard Norman Primiano, an American religious studies scholar, discussed this idea of what is known as vernacular religion. Now, vernacular religion is something that expands the scope. When I say beyond, this is what I mean. It expands the scope for the theoretical domain to include those aspects of religious expression that are not just folkloristic, that in the sense that they are not just that which is marginalized, but it shows a certain lived practice that has been incorporated. So how do we understand this congruence between bhakti and vernacular expression of religion? For which we need to go into what we understand by vernacular religion. So in this context, Leonard Norman Primiano problematizes folk religion. Those of you who are a part of this and the Young Folklorist Conference, we see that noted folklorist Simon Bronner, he actually looked at how there should be the concept of, the folk religion. So there are two different schools of thought, and I actually belong to the school of thought that vouches for this notion of vernacular religion. So Primiano problematizes folk religion, stating that he thinks that using the term folk religion gives it an unofficial status, that it is something like an either or. And therefore, he offers an alternative to understanding religion as vernacular religion, which gives way or gives the space to discuss its variety of manifestations and perspectives that is found in various aspects of human religiosity. Furthermore, vernacular religion is religion as it is lived, religion as it is experienced, right? The way it is being encountered, understood, and interpreted. So in that sense, using bhakti, which is a personalized form of religion, and relating that to vernacular religion would again expand the scope of studying something that is, say, for so to say, a part of Desi thinking or Desi theoretical framework, and places it and contextualizes it within the global fabric of religious studies. So this idea of the dialogic vernacular expressivity gives way to the study of vernacular religion, yes. And when we talk about this personalized form of religion, we may consider some of the notions that Mikhail Bakhtin discusses. Within the Virashaiva context, we have the unique genre of the vachana, the poetic composition. And before we go into what we mean by vachana, the utterance, according to Mikhail Bakhtin, can be understood to be an expression of an individual. It may be either oral or written, and pertaining to different aspects of human activity. Through the thematic content linguistic style, each utterance articulates a specific goal, especially through the compositions. So this being the case, the unique genre of the Vachana poetry of the Virashaiva community may feature or may be understood in the context of this utterance, because Vachana quite literally translates to Vachana or the spoken word. But interestingly, you will also see parallels, say for example in Lalde, where you have the term Vak. So utterance again becomes a very interesting Bhaktinian concept that relates to Bhakti. And a little more specifically within the same context, Mikhail Bakhtin speaks of what is known as complex utterances, right? And building on this idea of the utterance would be that of the speech genre. And one such utterance here we can say will in the Vachana composition would be a particular form of poetry which is known as the Bedagina Vachanagalu. Right? The Bedagina Vachana in this case is this example over here. The wilderness grew in the sky. That is an example of the Bedagina Vachana. So the Bedagina Vachana often is it, to so to speak, the closest literary alignment would be what is known as literary nonsense, right? And Michael Hallquist, he talks about literary nonsense where he says that it doesn't mean that what is spoken is completely nonsensical, right? I'm sure those who are Bhaktinian scholars are able to relate to this idea, and the idea of the carnivalesque might also step into your mind. So that is essentially the reason why Bhaktin becomes relevant in this expression of Bhakti, particular within the within the Virashaiva context. So here, when we look at this riddle form, on the right-hand side, if you can see the screen, there is a particular riddle, which is the type is known as the Bedagina Vachanagalu. right? And the Bedagina Vachana is a particular genre of Vachana composition that speaks of abstract concepts. At the outset, it may sound or it may appear to be nonsensical. And going back to what I started with Michael Hallquist, this nonsense is probably because the sense of order is completely different according to the normal or the normative sense of order. So there is an alternate sense of order where things would make sense. So a lot of riddles, not just Allama Prabhu, for instance, even if you take Kabir's poetry, you can see in Ulat Bamsi, you see Linda Hess talks about this idea of twilight language or Sandhya Bhasha. And there, since these are very deeply coveted secrets, they are hidden within esoteric symbolism and meaning. Let me just read out this vachana. A wilderness grew in the sky. In the wilderness, a hunter, in the hunter's hand, a deer. The hunter will not die till the beast is killed. Awareness is not easy, is it? O Lord of the caves. So this particular vachana, there are several other vachanas, but this particular, Bedagina vachana talks about the verbal structure seems to be that of a riddle that you need to identify and that you need to understand the meaning that it possesses, right? So the listener would have to break down these indirect statements. What do you mean by the wilderness that grew in the sky? How can there be wilderness in the sky? When you speak about sky, you talk about expanse, right? And space. How is it that you talk about wilderness over here? What are the symbolic symbolic connotations for the hunter and the beast? And how does it relate to awareness, right? So these are the aspects that one needs to ponder over when you discuss the riddle format. So to put it shortly, the Bedagina Vachanas thrive on paradoxes and inversions. So in this case, the meaning of this riddle would mean that Allama's relationship between the hunter and the deer is reversed over here. Okay, the death of the deer is generally in the hands of the hunter because the hunter hunts the deer. But in this context, the death of the hunter is dependent on the death of the deer. So in this case, you are actually talking about the symbolic meaning of deer, the fleeting sense of awareness. So by delving deeper into the meaning, into the esoteric meaning, one might be able to uncover the significance of this riddle. So a second notion of Bhaktin that we can discuss within the context of Veerashaiva Bhakti would be the case of the speech genre. So the speech genre, right. Can you see the speech genre? Right, over here. The speech genre, according to Mikhail Bakhtin, again, refers to the complex genres are nuanced in the sense that they incorporate a lot more verbal genres into their into this frame of speaking. So particularly with Veerashaiva saints and their Vachana poetry, they take pride in what is known as expression of their personal religion or their vernacular expression of religion through the occupation, through the way in which they live their lives. So for example, a basket weaver would use an example of basket weaving. Okay, somebody who is a cobbler would use the expression of of his profession. Or Devra Dasimaya, one of the most renowned poets, would use metaphors from boating. So this becomes a complex idea of what is known as speech genre. But what I would like to posit over here is a development of Bhaktin speech genre as the personalized speech genre. And this personalized speech genre is what we can see in the novel. But here I would actually like to show you Nagaparana's 2017 film that was based on Saint Allama, so that you would be able to understand this in a more immersive manner, what we essentially mean by speech genre. So there are several speech genres that one can cull out from these fictionalized biographies, particularly in the text. But what I would like to emphasize here is what is known as the speech genre of kin. So what is interesting about this novelized saint narrative or this fictionalized biography of the saint is that most of the time when we look at the narratives of saints, they are purely edificatory. They celebrate in some sense their grandeur. Saints are projected to be invincible. But in this excerpt, which is extremely endearing, you will see that the tender relationship between a mother and a child is expressed and elaborated in great detail. And this has also been given a lot of visibility in the film videos, which we'll see shortly. So the speech genres of kin is a version of the speech genre that examines the close family ties and the intimate bonds between the members of the family. So, in Tamil, we have a term called Thai Pas, right? And in Sholay, you have the term where you say, Mere paas maa hai. So, that is essentially what you see happening over here. That Allama is extremely close to his mother. And that seeps through both in the fictionalized biography from where this excerpt has been taken. And it also seeps through in the film excerpt that we are going to see shortly. So if you see over here, come moon and bring the pot of pearls. See, call him. Sunyani also said, showing the moon to Prabhu. So the mother talking to the child, feeding the child, looking at the moon is a motive that we understand is very common within the South Asian, you can even say the South Asian understanding of the mother-child relationship, right? So Prabhudeva looks at the moon, the child gazes at the moon for a moment. An unusual experience flashed in the eyes of the child. The child gazed at the moon, felt elated, and then suddenly lost. And as if a very dear object had been lost and suddenly comes to sight. It was overwhelmed with feeling. It bent forward from the waist of the mother, raising its hand towards the moon. Such a descriptive aspect is very unlikely when we actually look at hagiographical texts of saints. But that is given a scope in this sort of unique liminal space of this fictionalized biography, where, and we see this genre actually picking up where you have a lot more writing. For example, autobiography of the goddess, which is based on Anda, of the Vaishnavite saint. So exactly. So in this sense, the speech genre of kin gives way to the expression of personal relationships for the saint protagonist, and it brings out the humane dimensions to the saint figure. So this again would be determined by the choice of words. Now, Bakhtin says that a particular community, a particular relationship, particular ideology influences the speech genre. And that is something we see over here as well. So speech genres are diverse. A large, and I quote from Bhaktin, a large number of genres that are widespread in everyday life are so standard that the speaker's individual speech will be manifested only in its choice of a particular genre. Therefore, this shapes this shapes what we understand as an individual's manner of speech. So when we keep this in mind, we may look at some intermediate examples, and when we see the
ಗೆಳೆಯರ ಜೊತೆ ಆಟ ಆಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರು ಬಾ ಬಾ ಕಂದ ಬಾ ಮಗು
ಅಬ್ಬೆ
ಬಾ ಮಲ್ಗು ನಿದ್ದೆ ಮಾಡು ಜೋ ಜೋ ಲಾಲಿ ಹರನೇ ಲಾಲಿ ಜೋ ಜೋ ಲಾಲಿ ಶಿವನೇ ಲಾಲಿ ಜೋ ಜೋ ಲಾಲಿ ಹರನೇ ಲಾಲಿ ಜೋ ಜೋ ಲಾಲಿ ಶಿವನೇ ಲಾಲಿ.
All right. So two very interesting things can be observed over here, which is number one, that you can see the speech genre the choice of words used by the mother, the expression here in terms of the relationship between Allama, the child Allama, and the mother, right? And the mother taking care of the child, pruning and applying salve on his injured hands. And second, you also see another nuanced genre, a South Asian genre, which is the lullaby. As folklorists, it is important for us to delve deep into the manners of storytelling that is seen manifesting in various mediums. We had already looked at the text, where you can look at the speech genre in the text form, but through an intermediate parallel, wherein you see in this visual in this musical based on Allama's life, you also see the genre of the lullaby that which is again through a creative license incorporated within it. So I'm slowly arriving at why Beyond becomes important when we discuss religious expression, and essentially when we look at Bhakti within the South Asian context. And what we are arriving at when we discuss this Beyond, which I've indicated as a question mark, is how much more can you see beyond thematic understanding? How much more is it necessary for thinkers, for social science, social scientists, for folklorists, for literary theorists, and scholars of folkloristics to look and understand, interpret the South Asian genres of storytelling within the context, within the historical context, right? We'll also look at a later example to understand this speech genre of kin.
ಜ್ಞಾನದ ಉತ್ತುಂಗಕ್ಕೇರಿದರೆ ಅದೇ ನಾವು ತಲುಪಬಹುದಾದ ಎತ್ತರ. ಅದೇ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಿಂಹಾಸನ ಎಂದರೆ ಶೂನ್ಯ ಸಿಂಹಾಸನ.
ನನ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೆಳೆದು ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾನೆ ಕಂದ.
ಶುಭವಾಗಲಿ.
ದೀರ್ಘಾಯುಷ್ಯಮಸ್ತು.
ವೈರಾಗ್ಯ ಹುಟ್ಟುವ ಗಳಿಗೆ.
All right. So over here you can see that it's a very short excerpt of the discourse that goes on. So one of the very interesting things about this Veerashaiva expression is the interrogation, a spiritual interrogation. Devotees are encouraged to dialogue with one another, with the gurus, with their spiritual mentors, in order to arrive at understandings, spiritual epiphanies, right? And even in the Vachana, the form where we looked at the utterance, the riddle form is ultimately to question, to interrogate, and to arrive at understanding. This sort of a discourse-oriented question-answer is not unfamiliar to Indian ways of thinking. Therefore, this dialogism that is at play within this expression of religion, again, is something that's very interesting to note. Okay. Sorry, yes.
ತಕ್ಕಣಕ್ಕ ಜಂ ಕಿಡ್ಕ ಧಿತ್ ತಕ್ಕಣಕ್ಕ ಜಂ ಕಿಡ್ಕ ಧಿತ್ ತಕ್ಕಣಕ್ಕ ಜಂ ತತ್ತ ಜಂ ತತ್ತಣ್ಣಂ ತತ್ತ ಜಂ ತತ್ತಣ್ಣಂ ತತ್ತರುಂ ತತ್ತ ಧಿ ತತ್ತಿತ್ ತತ್ತ ಜಂ ತತ್ತಣ್ಣಂ ತತ್ತ ಜಂ ತತ್ತಣ್ಣಂ ತತ್ತರುಂ ತತ್ತ ಧಿ ತತ್ತಿತ್ ತಕ್ಕಣಕ್ಕ ಜಂ ಕಿಡ್ಕ ಧಿತ್ ತಕ್ಕಣಕ್ಕ ಜಂ. ಆಶೀರ್ವಾದ ನಿನಗೆ ಲಭಿಸಲಿ. ನಿನ್ನ ಹಾದಿಯ ಮರ
Right. So if you had observed in the first video where we have the example where the mother and where Alama is represented as a child, he would have a toy, a wooden cart. That's what he holds in this particular video, right? So the mother, the expression of the mother and the choice of language that is used relates to the idea of this speech genre. So this is just one of the examples that we can look at when we try to look at the ways in which Bhakti finds its modes of expression, right? Bhakti, not just in terms of Bhakti towards the deity, but also Bhakti or the dedication or the love towards a parent. And that we see resplendent in Alama's life. Now, the penultimate concept that I would like to talk about is when I mentioned the transdisciplinary approach, I had already introduced the concepts from literary theorism, literary criticism, wherein we discussed Bakhtin's notion of speech genre and the utterance. And within, to theorize Bhakti as an analytical category, we looked at vernacular religion as proposed by Leonard Norman Primiano, and we looked at Bhakti is expression in congruence with vernacular religion. Now, what I propose as a multidisciplinary or a trans approach, which brings together studies in folkloristics, religious studies, as well as literary studies, would be this notion of the hagiographic folk motif. So the hagiographic folk motif is inspired. I'm sure folklorists are aware of the significance of the Stith Thompson anti-Aarne folk motif index and Asst Shemi's archetypes and motifs in folk literature, right? Where you look at different aspects of stories that can be categorized according to the Dewey Decimal System. And the hagiographic folk motif is inspired by this motif, although there are a few motifs that may relate to this from the oral tales from India, which was compiled by Thomas Bailey. A lot of the hagiographical continuities that you see in a lot of the lives of saints, in many lives of saints, for instance, in their lives, seem to be absent. So for which we may consider some of the motifs such as supernatural instances of birth and death, motifs of travel and quest, dreams and visions prior to the birth of the Saint Protagonists, the divine calling to a certain place, leaving of the home, the prodigal son, the prodigal daughter, travel, wandering, and the motive of quest, and also overcoming obstacles. All works in line of a hero trying to achieve their final goal, right? Also aspects of wonder, miracles, exhibition of miracles, and acceptance of fame are all continuities which I have observed extensively in my doctoral thesis, and is also available and is seen represented in the film by Nagabharana. So out of these various motives, I'd like to look at one particular motive, which is the which is the motive of travel and quest. So here, please bear with me because it was very difficult to get an excerpt of this. Here, this particular motive relates to hagiography of place, divine calling towards the ultimate spiritual destination. This motive has been chosen because it's extremely essential when it comes to the spiritual growth and the ultimate culmination of spiritual experience and spiritual destination in the lives of saints. So Mirabai finally goes to Vrindavan, Andal goes to Srirangam, and all of the other Bhakti saints, they reach a particular spiritual destination. So I'm sorry that the text is really tiny, but if I were to just read a small excerpt from this, it was half wakeful, half sleep. Prabhudeva got up and opened the door. A vague human figure seemed to stand there. Prabhu saw in the direction it was a big Shiva temple. In front of it was a boy with a tabor dancing. That vague person pointed in another direction. What was there? A narrow cave. Everything is you. If you want to become yourself, only rouse yourself from the sleep and come. That vague shape was pulling him by the hand. So, and observe, this is the excerpt that has been taken from the fictionalized biography text based on Allama Prabhu. But the interpretation or the observation that we can cull out or we can infer from this is sleepless reveries indicating the call of the soul for the Saint Protagonists, which is an abstract of the projection of what happens to the future. This particular vision, V2, is actually available in the Folk Motif Index 510.1, where God speaks in vision to devotee, collected in Oral Tales of India from page number 433, right? The Thomson-Bailey's Index. So there are several other motives. If those of you who are interested, I'm happy to share this with you, later after this. But I just want to emphasize on how it is important to go beyond thematic understanding of text. Because when we actually delve deep into the ways in which stories are being told, the ways in which South Asian genres of storytelling seep in through the written form by influences of the oral form, and how there is a certain liminal space that provides this transfusion, right? As folklorists, we really love the term liminality, Victor Turner. So this sense of critical liminality that I would like to use is very essential in order to engage with culling out or with inferring the influences of South Asian storytelling. And in that sense, it would be possible to examine phenomena, the Bhakti phenomena, more as an analytical category. So we've almost come to the end of the presentation. And to surmise all of this, what this talk essentially planned to do when it referred to Bhakti, Bhaktin and Beyond is, one, to set the context for Bhakti as a vernacular expression of religion, in bringing in the congruent idea of vernacular religion as proposed by Leonard Norman Premiano. By bringing in the concept of utterance and speech genre, it looked at both text and it looked at both a visual text and a text that is based on the life of a saint, a fictionalized biography, which is a unique genre, to bring out the aspects of the utterance and the speech genre, two of which were examined. And what this essentially does is helps us make the shift from text to context. And this concept of the dialogic vernacular expressivity, which is what entails the idea of Mikhail Bakhtin, could be extended to other studies, say, for instance, even in performance. This sense of dialogism, I'm sure, also works with other folk theatrical performances such as Terukuthu, Yakshagana, Jatra, and other folk performative forms, where the character of the Sutradhar, or like the character of the Kattiyakaran in the Tamil Kattai Kuthu, performs this role of a dialogue as a dialogic voice that critically looks at that sort of moves between the realms of myth and reality. Right? So you're talking about, and that form becomes a way of teaching the common public stories from the Puranas. This, of course, I could not bring into this discussion owing to the lack of time. What this does essentially is expands the scope of study of non-conforming genres, because the term folklore or folk religion constrains or creates a restriction on what we can study as text, a problem that I personally experienced when I was doing my doctoral thesis. But through interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches, through intergeneric studies, you can examine the various in-betweens, the fluid spaces and the liminal spaces to discuss more innovative ways of understanding the expression and performance of religion. So what we essentially need to do when we look at beyond and scope of what I wish to do in the larger scope of this research is to foster dialogue between other disciplinary domains, to examine dialogic vernacular expressivity, see its relevance in other narratives, and also to see whether it extends to other forms of text from other countries globally as well. So I think that's it from my side for now. Perhaps we can take some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nimeshika. It was a fascinating and exhaustive talk. You applied Bakhtin's idea of dialogue, speech genres, utterances, and applied it to vernacular religious expressions, and offered a unique way of analyzing South Asian texts and films that necessarily incorporate some amount of oral traditions. So I have lots of questions in my mind, but I will first open the floor. So please ask your questions. So we have a question in the chat box, and then P. Krishnaswamy has raised a hand. But I think you should address the question on the chat box first because it was raised.
Right.
Malika, 1 minute. Ms. Das, can you hear me?
Right, we can hear you.
Okay. Can I speak? Is it my turn?
Yes, so you can ask your question.
Okay. It's not a question. First, let me congratulate Ms. Venkatesan for having chosen this topic, because in the academic circles, very rarely do we see researchers taking interest in folklore. I have a few observations. Number one, we have stopped using the term vernacular these days because it is a colonial expression. Instead, we use native. So it is native expressivity, dialogic native expressivity, if she chooses to change the term. Okay. And her areas, it appears, are folk religion. And instead of using the term Bhakti, normally the terms like divinity, theology are being used. The divinity and theology of the folk are totally different from the classical mode. And the theme she has chosen and the the poet she has chosen is Alma Prabhu, who is not considered to be a folk poet. And also, Veerashaivism is a branch of classical religion, and doesn't come, strictly speaking, doesn't come under folk religion or folk literature. And if she considers this Veerashaivism as a folk religion, there are other forms. A good number of films are also made in this genre. If you look at the Kannada folklore history, the epics based on folk religion are number one, Madheshwara Kavya, number two, Manteswami Prasanga, and number three is Mailarlinga. These folk art forms are still being performed. In fact, the folk religion is expressed through the literature, the performance. So there are three texts like folk, oral text, basically oral text, and there is absolutely no written form. Even if it is a written form, it is not accepted as the authentic text, because it is always moving, and each age, each era produces one version of that folk epic or whatever it is. So there is no written form, there's only an oral text. So oral text comes first, and then performance text. There are a good number of folk artists who perform the text. It may be a story, it may be a hagiography, it may be based on an incident in history, both fictional and realistic. And then this leads to ritual text. Folk religion is basically is not axiomatic. Okay, so but it is expressed in the rituals. These rituals also undergo certain changes over a period of time. Okay, so in my view, the approach of Ms. Venkatesan is top to bottom. Folklore never starts at the top, Bhaktin or whoever it is. There are a number of theories in folklore, but then folklore research basically goes from bottom to top. So it doesn't believe in theorizing. It doesn't believe in theorizing because theory doesn't exist. You can say it is a postmodern approach. But that is the fact. Even the folk, the terms like great tradition, little tradition, they are all rubbish, because there is only two traditions. One is mainstream tradition, the other is exclusive tradition or individual tradition. So this is how these are the developments in studies in folk religion and folk music, folk literature, folk epics. So, though I welcome Ms. Venkatesan's presentation, she has to look into the other sides of the certain traditions that have been established in the folk research and studies. She's welcome. I'm a retired professor, and I have done studies in folk epics and folk religion based on two folk epics, one from Kannada Madheshwara Kavya and the other is Annanmarkade, the brother's story. So I have recorded and I have made certain findings also. Okay, thank you and congratulations, Ms. Venkatesan.
Professor Krishnasamy, it's so nice to see you. I think you were at Christ University, if I'm not wrong.
Yes. I'm from Christ University.
Yes, I had met with you regarding this when I was a student.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. You are an alumnus of Christ?
Yes, I did come to see you when you were the Dean of Research, when you were there. So it's really wonderful to see you.
Oh, good.
And actually, it was the conversation that I had with you that led me on this path. So it's wonderful to see life come a full circle.
Good, Nimeshika.
So, Professor Krishnasamy, thank you so much for your in-depth insights. And I think you have made some very valid points. And definitely, I must take into consideration your expertise, your experience in this field. And albeit I agree that my approach may seem radical in terms of the expression, which is why I would like to make that distinction of using the vernacular religion is not in the sense of how Ganesh Devi understands as vernacular, the way it has been understood in the colonial context, but rather vernacular religion as understood by Leonard Norman Primiano and another school of thinkers such as Marian Bauman, Yulo Walk, and is to talk about vernacular as inspired from architecture. It neither conforms to the idea of Robert Redford's idea of the grand tradition and little tradition. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to go into the context of the Margi and Desi, which I think is really important, right? And within the Kannada context as well. But here I just stuck to this. So vernacular religion in that sense, again, which is why I wish to use an emic term, which is Bhakti. And you might be very familiar with A.K. Ramanujan's idea of context-sensitive and context-free terminologies. So whatever insights you've given, thank you so much for embellishing my research. I believe I need to work a lot more into this to make that relevance. But I would like to say that Elaine Fisher is somebody who looks at the Vedanta and the theological aspects of the Veerashaiva text. And Dan Ben Herud actually discusses the hagiography in a much more extensive way, also approaches this sort of Veerashaivic, this sort of thing. There are some other scholars who are also using this. Also, Jean Roger and Subbarau's translation of the Basava Purana by Princeton actually speaks about the use of Ripada, the meter that is used for folk expression. Malay Madheshwara's, the folk, Manteswamy, right, who had written Malay Madheshwara's epic poem, I think that will purely be, which is why we need to make a distinction between vernacular religion, and that's why I'm contesting the idea of folk religion. Because if I use folk religion, you are absolutely right, and that is something I shouldn't do. But anyways, thank you so much, Professor. I'll definitely consider all of your insights. Good to see you.
Hello, Nimeshika. So we have one question in the chat box. So Vidhi is saying, how do you view Bhakti movement as resistance as opposed to conformity, which Bhakti also seems to imply?
I think this kind of goes back to what I just recently mentioned in terms of A.K. Ramanujan's understanding in his very famous article, which I think everybody should read. Is there an Indian way of thinking? where he uses a term from linguistics. I think Krishna Swami sir can also give more elaboration on this. Particularly with the Veerashaivas, I don't think there was conformity, because it came as an emergence that opposed the Brahminical ways of expression. And Bhakti movement was a subversive movement in the sense that it challenged the norms of institutionalization. So I think the institutionalization post the Bhakti movement in recent times, with the Arvas and the Nayanmars, the text, I can speak with the context of South Indian Bhakti and the Vaishnavite and the Shaivite saints, but I'm not entirely sure whether we can actually look at Bhakti as conforming, because Bhakti is all about defying. Does that make sense to you, Vidhi?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's quite radical, but I agree, because I come from the northern part, and here also, if you look at the Bhakti movement, it was about resistance, not the Almighty, but the ways of the world. Right? Like you gave example of Mirabai or Kabir. They were the pioneers of the Bhakti movement in this part of the country, and interestingly, like just to give you a little context, I work on deliberative traditions in India, starting from politics, and how I also looked at how these Bhakti movements and these folklores and these vernaculars, these are part of deliberative tradition in India. So yeah, I am also in a way working on dialogism, but on the philosophical side, I'm not much aware of folklorist theories. But yes, A.K. Ramanujan seems to be a common link. Thank you, and it is very fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Since nobody is asking any question or have written anything, I would ask something. When regarding the method you offered as to how to approach literary texts in the South Asian context, it is you proposed a way of going beyond the text and then exploring the context, that is going beyond the text and then delving down into the context, right? And that's why we look at the expressions that are crystallized from some kind of religious or vernacular expressions. But then my question is, even if we look at such expressions in literary text or film, to which extent can we go beyond these texts? Precisely because they come from a time from wherein we can't always go to, right? Because if we look at the woman's expression, or maybe the mother figure or whoever, their expressions in a text, we have to rely on the text, because we can't find enough document on these women from that time. So how much can we go beyond the text, and then what is the scope of this beyond that you focused on towards the end of your lecture?
Right. Spandita, thank you so much for making those very valuable inferences. I think when you think about, like, I have explored this very minimally, but there is a very fast, but if you're interested, I can also share my doctoral thesis with you, and it is also available on Shodhganga for download. But intertextuality, and Christina Bachelega, another folklorist who actually studies fairy tales, talks about the web of narratives, more in terms of fairy tale context, but I think it's applicable over here. And she speaks of what is known as narrative cultures in the plural. So in the light of dialogism, and when we are looking at polyphony, also to use another term from Bakhtin's, wide range of theoretical conceits, looking at a certain sense of multiple approaches would be very relevant. So in that sense, you can also use intermediate approach, which was a very elementary thing that I did over here. Not only did I look at the fictionalized biography of Saint, which was one of the excerpts that I had taken from my thesis, but I also complemented the same idea through Nagabharana's 2017 film. So, which is why it becomes important to look at South Asian storytelling. doesn't mean that visual adaptations and cinematic storytelling is something that do not feature it. Yuan Zhang, for instance, actually discusses a concept called filmic folklore, where he talks about how films themselves have a certain kind of a folk motive that is incorporated. With the studies in popular culture and cultural studies, we also see these sort of boundary crossings, that you can see between these genres. So when we look at the shift from not textual studies and thematic studies, but narrative studies, and looking at narratives and moving from text to context, where you also bring in performance, where you also bring in the oral traditions, where you also bring in the socio-political background, and you also bring in literary theory, that is also important. And I think that is where I come from, because I cannot call myself as a pure folklorist, like some of the wonderful work that you're doing, for instance, like, the field work. But I'm still getting into it. Like my leeway into it was, visiting fellowship program. But I'm now slowly in that path. But I think it is really essential to look at what other disciplines have to offer to us.
Right. Who else has a question? Please raise your hands, or you can just unmute yourself and ask, or you can just write your question on the chat box. So if there is none, then we can wrap up the session.
So, I mean, if anyone's interested, most of my insights on my slide deck are actually from these concepts that I've been working on in other contexts in my articles. So if you're interested, I'm happy to share that as well. Or it is all available on my ResearchGate and academia.edu page.
So we have a question from Meenakshi. In the postmodern world, do you think Tamil theatre, Therukuthu, is still able to transform bhakti to the audience? Are they influenced by popular culture and considered an entertainment?
Right. Thank you, Meenakshi, for this question. And it sort of takes me to an interesting experience that I had when I went to watch a Therukuthu performance in rural Tamil Nadu. So it was just for about 2-3 days. It was an elementary, beginnings of a field work. But then I couldn't continue on with that because there were some issues with the interlocutor. So what I observed there was, in the wee hours of the night, the seamless transition between, the mythological world and the real world, where there was like a lot of slapstick. It reminded me a lot of Shakespeare's theatre. So there is really high, profound expression, stories from the Puranas that's being related by the gods themselves. Okay, so there are women, there are men, there are children, there are people who are, under the influence, they're inebriated, and there are all kinds of people with all kinds of temperaments. So when you look at that, you can see that definitely there is a certain dialogism when you look at the Kattiyakaran, right? In the sense that he's able to interpret the godly figures, what they say to the people, and he interprets them in a very colloquial, in colloquial terms. So to say, the speech genre he uses is something that would be very, very banal within the context, not something that not the register that is being used by the gods to speak. So when the Kattiyakaran speaks to the god, the language that is used is very, very brusque, is very sometimes even rude, but he doesn't realize that he's being rude. Whereas the spoken language of the gods is a very pure form of Tamil. So in that sense, I think that distinction and that sort of many voices that emerge both in performance and in teaching and didactism I think that's very interesting to see. I'm not very familiar with theatrical productions, and my research is unfortunately extremely limited when it comes to theater studies. So I think I cannot be, it wouldn't be right on my part to actually say something about that. But is there someone else who would like to take this? So, I mean, I don't know about theater, but contemporary explorations of Bhakti, I think the film was an example. And you can also see novels that there are other kinds. There's one called Sky Clad, which is again a version of the story about Akka Mahadevi. And now we see that there are several films that are being made about saints. So those interpretations, Allama Prabhu, for instance, I think you should watch it. It is said that he had a conjugal relationship before he became a celibate. So that aspect of conjugal relationship is explored in great graphic very, very immersively and very explosively in the particular film. So I think that maybe adds to your understanding of contemporary, and the very fact that it is partially fictionalized gives that scope to explore such nuances to saints who otherwise would just be an epitome of goodness, and there's a very monologic way of exploring them.
If anybody has any question, we can still take it up.
I think there are just comments.
Right. So I think it is 9:05, and then since there is no more question, I think we should wrap up the session. Thank you, Nimeshika, again for this wonderful talk. It was a beautiful way to explore South Asian texts through an intermediate approach. I personally loved this method and will think how to work with it. And of course, I am sure my fellow participants also learned many things. And I will wrap up the session here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pandita, for moderating this.